Okay, so welcome to the part two of our lecture, and we will be talking here about the process necessary for designing units of work. I am certain that different lecturers will have a different approach. So, as I mentioned in part one, I'm very happy for you to use a different approach, provided that you actually integrate capabilities into your design systematically. So I've spoken about it in part one. I don't have to waste time here. So let's move on. We've spoken about this particular video, where this postgraduate students made the point very clear that unless students actually understand what they are doing, they will not learn, right? So that's pretty straightforward. So our activity has to have an engagement phase that will enable students to make sense of what they are doing there, why are they there, what's in it for them and for others, right? Because otherwise, unless they calibrate themselves in that activity, it's gonna be very hard for them to function and learn. We've spoken about this slide too. We cannot afford not know. We cannot afford now not to know about how the brain processes information. I have shared with you a few aspects of it. I could probably write a book on this now in relation to literacy, because I have worked in this area for quite a while, and in fact we will be probably writing a book. But I've given to you a few hints that are most important at this very moment and at this stage of your study. So one thing that I wanted to raise here, we've spoken in part one about the tension between theory and practice. This tension is not very well articulated by many educators. One of the things I wanted to say is that typically in education, when you write the rationale for your lesson design, or for your lesson design, or for the design of your units of work, you are asked to choose a theory and just provide the rationale for your design. Now, this is not as simple. You are not, let me disappoint you, you do not have an education level in order for you to actually choose between theories. It would be nice if in year 2 or year 3 or even year 4 you'd feel powerful enough to actually say, oh, I love behaviorism. Well, actually no, you can't do that. And this is extremely important, and I wonder how much I have to go into it now, but let me start with what's on the screen. I have a lot of PhD students, and they work in different aspects of education. So early childhood, primary, whatever, high school, university. And I have to read, and we have dug out this particular paper by Alan Luke. I'll just edit those later. So by Alan Luke, I might find you the reference here for this paper, because lots of our students are very curious. So here it is, the reference. Oh, you can probably find it freely on Google. It's just there, hanging there. So anyway, so what I found interesting is that Alan Luke is very precise about what he wants from his model of teaching, and he says he's not actually interested in students' growth, and that's very interesting, because he's interested in applying whatever theory he believes in into practice, which is kind of aligned with the traditional belief, choose your theory and just do it, right? Well, but the curriculum, the Australian curricula, whether for early years or for later years, do not specify a particular theory. They don't have an agenda to support Michael Holliday's view of language because it's good for you, or any other view, Chomsky or Watson's behavioristic models, or whatever, Skinner's. So what do? You pick one, or you follow the hottest professor on the stage, or what do you do? Right, so well, my personal view is that you actually have to know what questions to ask and be able to actually respond to them, right? So when you write your rationale, it would be very interesting to actually see whether you know what questions to ask. So let's have a look how I could teach you about what questions to ask. It's nothing actually out of this planet. You might have heard of it before, but let's go and do it differently. So here it is. I've worked with a colleague from Indonesia. He did some research and he came to Australia for me to help him to turn this research into a publishable material, right? So we ended up writing a piece of work together. He came up with some data. We divided the data into 3 simple questions. Life is simple. And what we found out, that the academics in Indonesia, because the data was from academics in Indonesia who teach critical reading, right? So they need to teach students at university to read critically. I think we should be doing it in Australia too. Anyway, so and what we found was that Indonesian academics knew perfectly well what to teach and how to teach. And you would say, well, what else do they need to know? Well, so the what to teach is kind of equivalent what we would say the content of the curriculum, right? You must teach them to analyze, you must teach them to synthesize, you must teach them how to debate, you must teach them how to argue, see things from someone else's point of view, right? This is the curriculum content. And then the idea is, well, turning this content into something that sticks to people's heads. That's it. This is the philosophy of education. Well, actually, no. What you need is another column here that is missing. We didn't find any data here. Is what kind of experiences do you need to generate for students for your learning activities to meet the objectives? It's not necessarily how to teach, but what kind of learning experiences you need to generate. And I'm sure you are all confused what this means. You mean like how to teach? Exactly. So my point is really here that I'm sure that if we actually ran the same questionnaire that my colleague from Indonesia applied in his country, if we did it in Australia, we would have had pretty much similar confusion in Australia, right? So here's what to do and here's how to do it. Well, why to do it? Well, we know why. We have, learning is constructivism, and then Vygotsky said so, and then we do that, Ania. And how did you know that this is constructivism? Well, because people construct. Okay. So how do you know that you enable construction? Well, they put it themselves in their head. They put it together in their own heads. That's a wonderful definition of constructivism. From what elements will they put all of this together? Right? What will be the building blocks? Well, we don't know, Ania. Right? So nobody knows. But anyway, to cut the long story short, we're not really sure that unless we actually know what learning experiences you actually need to generate for your learning activities to meet the objectives, we don't really know whether the translation of this into this is correct. What learning experiences are necessary for this to happen, for this to happen, for this to happen? And in any event, maybe, right, just let's keep it simple, right? What learning experiences? Not how to implement it, but what learning experience, what people need to feel, what people need to experience in order for this to be the answer. right? Well, when my colleague went back to Indonesia, we've written our paper, we've gotten our conclusion, and then I thought to myself, well, what kinds of learning experiences I would have liked to see. And you can see them here. So there would have been a third column here if I was actually to answer my own question. And I would think of things like, I would like my students to feel inspired to use reading to support meaningful action. Well, feel inspired. Where do you think I got that inspiration concept from? Activities to be born out of purpose, to have motivational significance for students. Where do you think I got it from? The inspired, the motivational significance, the purpose. I got all of this from the concept of literacy, right? Literacy, it's not tools, it's tools we engage for a purpose, right? We've worked for about, how many? 8 weeks, trying to get this point across in our meetings, right? That literacy is not tools, it's the tools we engage for a purpose. That's why we don't engage all the tools all the time. And that's why many of us only know how to use some tools, not all the tools. Like, I'm sure that if someone now asked me to do spreadsheet, and I have studied spreadsheet, by the way, you'd find that I know nothing about it, right? I have studied it, it was a long time ago, and I can't remember, and I haven't worked with a spreadsheet. For my purposes, very rarely I count money. And when I need to, there's 5 million people at CDU paid to help academics like me to get the budget for a project right? So even there I have support, but at least I know that there are administrative structures in the university that have fantastic literacy tools to help people like me to make Australian government happy and not stuff up taxpayers' money. Okay, so inspired, motivational significance, where does it come from? The concept of meaning. Remember, Jordan Peterson said something is meaningful when it has implications for behavior. It has motivational significance, implications for behavior, right? So people will be engaged when they got inspired to do something. All right, so we got it from, well, actually we got it now from two, from literacy and from psychology. So what was it? The concept of meaning, right? So that would have been actually from, what would we call the concept here? Well, the concept of meaning, or we could call it human nature, from psychology. Anyway, that will do for a while. But literacy is the key thing for us here. What else do we have? What other learning experiences? We want critical reading activity to emerge from the life of the community. Really? Where did we hear it about? Where did we hear it before? We heard about this when we were discussing literacy, right? Our needs, our activities emerge from our participation in the community, in the life of the community, so we can actually affect that life, right? Fill the form, complete the spreadsheet. You know, every time I complete the spreadsheet to get the money from the taxpayers, Australia's bank account goes lower, but the output from the whole activity hopefully will be benefiting the whole community. So again, so the critical reading activity to emerge from the life of the community and to contribute to the community. Again, the concept of literacy. Enabling students to relate the purpose of their reading activities to their value in the community. Again, the concept of literacy. See, we didn't have any of that here, the concept of literacy, or maybe we did, synthesizing. It's so what, yeah, we did too. Synthesizing is comes from the concept of literacy. But why would people synthesize? What skills do they need? Blah, 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 all of this. We need now concepts that will allow us to think of contexts in which these emerge as significant. You can't teach synthesizing of information until you engage students. They can see the relevance of it, they can see that it talks to the community, they can even see that this particular activity augments the meaningfulness of their lives. Oh my God, we learned particular thing and now I can apply it in more context, and actually it's good for me. I can see the world bigger and better, right? So these experiences here allow us to think of the kinds of activities that need to be put in place in order to make all these meaningful, relevant, and therefore enabling students to connect with, right? So this is a higher level of thinking of the content. So we can have a content, but unless the curriculum content, but unless we actually invent some identify learning experiences that will make this content look meaningful, we are just doing 19th century teaching, which is today we do comma, here's how you do comma, tomorrow we will do exclamation mark, this is how you do exclamation mark, right? Well, we need to actually look at the concepts we have learned thus far, and here they are, and think to ourselves, how do they help us to understand the kinds of learning experiences that we need to generate in our students, so that the content of the curriculum now is perceived or experienced by students in its all meaningfulness, right? So there's no, okay, so that's, I will leave it there. So what do we have here? Augment the meaningfulness of students' life. Building communities, websites build communities, right, for example. Enabling students to experience challenges, right? To feel challenged, that can, to experience challenges that can trigger exploratory behavior in the right brain hemisphere. Well, that's what we got from Jordan Peterson, right? That's a concept of learning. So that was literacy. All of this was literacy concept. Now we have the concept of learning. And here we have psychological concept here, which is the well-being, right? We want also students to reflect on how they react to others and their life experiences in order to learn about their own emotional life, right? So very often in the literature or in schools you will see that concepts like well-being or self-efficacy or resilience frequently may, or not always are, but could be seen as your internal factors, but you develop them only when you learn to respond to other people. So you develop a database. So you learn to be resilient when you help other people to be resilient, right? So someone else's trauma is a stepping stone for you to build your own skills to deal with trauma better. And now, once you have your questions responded to, which is literacy, learning, and personal well-being of the student, once you have those learning experiences outlined here according to these 3 questions, you can now check whether you have chosen your curriculum content correctly. Is it addressing all three of them? Or only one of them? Sufficient range of literacy experiences so that your design is actually balanced? So that's the curriculum content. And then when you will start thinking about pedagogy, and I'll take you through it just very briefly now, you will also answer to yourself questions like, am I covering this, am I covering this, am I covering this, am I covering this, right? So this list of learning experiences according to your concept of literacy, learning, and personal well-being actually is pivotal for you. It's a checklist against which you check your content and you check your pedagogy, whether it's actually addressing all of that. So in a sense, we could almost do this, hey? Something like that.